A homeless woman walked into the wrong house, thinking it was a shelter, where she met a lonely millionaire who changed her life forever. The rain fell in harsh, cold sheets, slicing through the night like glass. Camille's bare feet slapped against the wet cobblestone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The wind howled through the empty streets like a warning. Her coat, if it could still be called that, was nothing more than a threadbare jacket, soaked and clinging to her like a second skin. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her stomach twisted as fiercely as the storm above. That was when she saw it. A large stone house, tucked behind a wrought iron gate that stood ajar. No lights, no cars. Just the soft glow of a security lamp flickering above the porch. The front door was cracked open, as if left carelessly. Camille hesitated, then pressed forward. It looked like one of those old community centers she used to volunteer at years ago, the kind of place that might offer blankets, coffee, warmth, a miracle. She stepped inside. The foyer was cavernous. Marble floors stretched beneath her feet, and towering bookshelves lined the dark wooden walls. She could hear the tick of an antique clock echoing through the silence. No footsteps. No voices. She exhaled, letting the door close softly behind her. Then his voice, low, sharp, like steel dragged across ice. "What are you doing in my house?" Camille turned and froze. A man stood at the top of the staircase. His figure tall, broad-shouldered. His long dark hair was unkempt, hanging just past his chin. His beard was thick, his face pale, but it was his eyes, gray and glacial, that rooted her to the spot. They held the weight of storms, of silence, of 1,000 locked doors. I thought," Camille stammered, "I thought this was a shelter." "I saw the door open. This is private property," the man said, descending the stairs. "Get out." She stepped back, raising her hands. "Please, I didn't mean any harm. I just needed somewhere dry. Just for tonight. Do I look like I run a charity?" His voice turned colder. "I'll leave in the morning, I promise. I'm not stealing anything. I just—" Her voice cracked. "I don't have anywhere else." His jaw clenched. "Get out, now, before I call the police." Camille's chest tightened. Her eyes darted to the door. Can I sit a moment? Just a little warmth? I'll go after." He moved toward her, and something flickered behind his expression. Not pity, not anger. Something buried deeper, like a memory he'd tried to forget. "No," he said flatly, opening the front door wide. "Out." Camille hesitated one more second, then walked back into the storm. The door slammed behind her like the end of a sentence. Rain pelted her like stones. She walked to the center of the overgrown courtyard and collapsed beside a stone bench, curling her legs to her chest, arms hugging her sides. The wind tore at her jacket. Her fingers were already numb. She didn't cry. She'd forgotten how. Inside, Remy Bellamy stood at the window, watching her. For 5 years, no one had stepped into his home uninvited. Not since the accident. Not since the fire took his hand, and the grief took his fiancée. He should have turned off the porch light. He should have locked the gate. He cursed himself. But he couldn't look away. She was still there, shivering, trying to cover herself with her arms, like a child. The rain was merciless. Remy gritted his teeth. Why should he care? She was a stranger, a trespasser. And yet, he turned from the window, paced the room once, twice, then swore under his breath and opened the door. "Get inside," he snapped. Camille didn't move at first. Her eyes lifted slowly, stunned. Her lips were already turning blue. "I said, get in, before I change my mind." She stood shakily, water dripping from her sleeves, and stepped past him. Her breath fogged the air. She didn't say thank you, just stood there, dripping onto the floor, afraid any word might send him over the edge again. Remy pointed toward the fireplace in the next room. "Go sit there. I'll find something dry." Camille nodded and moved wordlessly toward the faint warmth of the hearth. As Remy disappeared down the hall, she sank onto the rug, holding her arms close. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, but something flickered in her chest, a glimmer, not of hope, but of pause. A moment that didn't end with the door slamming shut. A moment where someone, however reluctant, let her stay. Behind her, the old clock on the mantel ticked on, and for the first time in weeks, Camille felt time move with her instead of against her. The storm howled through the night, battering the walls of the old mansion like an angry ghost trying to claw its way in. Inside, the fireplace crackled weakly, casting long shadows over the kitchen walls. Camille sat hunched in a corner of the large, cold kitchen, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that still smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Her wet clothes were folded nearby, draped awkwardly over a chair to dry. Remy had said little after letting her in. He had moved with a kind of deliberate silence, placing a plate of cold chicken and half-stale bread on the counter and pushing a glass of water toward her. Then he left, not another word. Camille didn't touch the food. She was too cold, too tired, too raw. The house around her felt like a museum, dim, echoing, filled with furniture that hadn't been touched in years. The kind of place where nothing had moved in a long time, and no one had either. That was when she noticed the clock. It stood at the center of the foyer, tall and ornate, carved with patterns that seemed to breathe under the flickering candlelight. It was beautiful and broken. The hands were frozen at 12:07. She stared at it for a long time, her mind hazy from fatigue. A clock that did not tick. A man who barely spoke. A house full of ghosts, and a girl with nowhere else to go. She pulled the blanket tighter. Footsteps echoed faintly. Remy returned, this time holding a pillow, his expression unreadable. "The couch is yours for the night," he said, placing the pillow down without looking at her. "Bathroom's down the hall. Do not touch anything. Do not wander." Camille nodded. He paused, then added in a clipped voice, "This house is not a shelter. It's not safe. It's not warm. All I have here is the past, and the silence it left behind. If you can live with that, sleep." She swallowed hard. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Don't." And with that, he turned and disappeared again, his footsteps fading into the upstairs hallway. Camille sat in the dim kitchen for a long while. The bread was dry, but she ate it slowly, savoring even the smallest bite. Her stomach was a pit. Her bones ached. Her hands were red with cold. As she drifted off on the couch, cocooned in the blanket, she let her eyes close against the sound of rain and wind. For the first time in weeks, no one yelled at her to move. No one kicked her awake. No one saw her as a nuisance. In the quiet, she finally slept. Morning came gray and heavy. Camille opened her eyes to find the fire had gone out. The cold had returned, seeping through the cracks in the old mansion. She sat up, stretching, and rubbed her calves, which tingled from sleeping in the fetal position all night. Remy was nowhere in sight. She folded the blanket neatly, placed the pillow on the couch, and tiptoed toward the door. She wasn't going to overstay her welcome. She had made it through the night, that was enough. She opened the heavy front door, the early morning mist swirling in. The stone steps were slick with dew. She descended slowly, careful with her bare feet on the cold stone. But on the third step, pain exploded up her leg. Her calf cramped violently. She gasped and collapsed forward, landing hard against the cold ground with a cry. Her arms scraped on the rough stones. She tried to move, but the cramp tightened, locking her in place. The door slammed open behind her. Remy stood there, a silhouette against the faint morning light. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he cursed under his breath and strode forward. "You hurt?" Camille winced. "Just a cramp. I'll be fine. I'll go. Stop talking." He crouched beside her, his long fingers pressing gently into the muscle. His hands were cold but steady. "Why didn't you just stay put?" "I didn't want to bother you." "You already did," he muttered. He helped her to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, ashamed. She hadn't been this close to anyone in months. His shirt smelled faintly of old books and rain. His arms were strong, though she could feel the tension in them, like he was unused to touch, unused to caring. He guided her back inside. "Sit." She sank onto the couch, teeth chattering again. He disappeared and returned with a damp cloth and another blanket. "This isn't charity," he said, as he wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "It's common sense. You drop dead on my steps, I'll have to explain it." She almost smiled. "Duly noted." He gave her a long, unreadable look, then said, "You're not the first person who's tried to leave this house too early." She looked up. "What happened to them?" He didn't answer. He just walked to the broken clock and stared at it for a long, long time. And then, in the silence that followed, something began to shift. Something quiet. Something slow. Like the first hint of warmth after a long, bitter frost. The rain had eased, but the clouds still hung low over the house, casting every corner in a stubborn gray. Camille stayed quiet most of the morning, tiptoeing around the creaky floors as if afraid to stir something ancient from its slumber. Remy didn't speak much. He gave curt answers, grunted when spoken to, and rarely made eye contact. If Camille was in one room, he often drifted to another, but he didn't ask her to leave. That alone said something. By midday, Camille had found a broom and dustpan tucked away in the pantry. She swept quietly, not to be helpful, she didn't expect gratitude, but to feel like she was still part of the world. She moved room to room, careful not to touch anything fragile or precious. The house was filled with relics, intricate clocks, mechanical tools, strange gears and pieces laid out like half-finished puzzles across every surface. In the kitchen, she found a few eggs and a bruised tomato in the fridge. She boiled water on the stove and made a simple meal. The smell filled the air, warm and unexpected. Remy came down around noon and stopped short in the hallway, eyeing her with suspicion. "What are you doing?" "Making something to eat," Camille said. "I can leave it if you're not hungry." He didn't respond, just sat down across from her, staring at the plate as if unsure what to do with it. "I didn't touch your tools," she added. He grunted, lifting a fork. "Should hope not." They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of metal on porcelain. When she got up to rinse the plates, she noticed Remy glancing at her hands. "You've used mechanical tools before," he said suddenly. She looked at him, surprised. "A little. My dad used to fix things. I watched." Remy narrowed his eyes. "Watched or worked?" Camille smiled faintly. "Watched. Then tried. Then got good." He said nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. That afternoon, Camille wandered into the sitting room again. The tall grandfather clock still loomed in the center, frozen forever at 12:07. Its glass door was slightly ajar. She studied it. There were blueprints tacked to the wall behind it, old schematics, drawn by hand, beautifully detailed. Camille traced the air near them, admiring the precision. This wasn't a collector's house. It was a maker's. She turned and noticed a shelf lined with wooden models, miniature prototypes of various clocks, some barely held together, others polished to near perfection. She could tell just by looking. These weren't bought. These were born here. "You made these?" she asked softly. Remy, who had appeared in the doorway without a sound, said nothing. He stepped forward, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "They're beautiful," she said. "I mean it." He looked at the models, then away. They were once. Camille moved toward the large clock. She stood before it for a long moment, then reached out slowly, almost reverently, to touch the intricate face. "Don't!" Remy's voice cut the air like a whip. She froze. "Don't touch that." His voice dropped, more brittle now. Don't touch the past." Camille turned to him, startled. "I wasn't going to break it. I don't care what your intention was," he snapped, stepping closer. "This house has rules. That's one of them." Camille's chest tightened. The warmth she'd felt over breakfast. The flicker of connection. It vanished like smoke. "I'm sorry," she said, voice small. Remy didn't answer. He stood there, jaw clenched, staring at the clock like it had personally betrayed him. Camille swallowed her shame, grabbed her coat, and walked out the front door. The wind had picked up. The cold slapped her cheeks the moment she stepped outside. But she didn't care. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to remember that this wasn't her home, wasn't her story. She walked into the yard and sat on the stone steps, pulling her knees to her chest. Inside, Remy stood frozen. His heart pounded with rage and something far more dangerous: guilt. He had shouted, again, at someone who had done nothing wrong, someone who had called his work beautiful, someone who had reminded him, even for a moment, of the man he used to be. Upstairs, the broken hand of the grandfather clock still pointed at 12:07, but outside, beneath the pale sky, time had started to move again, one heartbeat at a time. Remy sat alone in the dark parlor, the only light coming from the dim glow of a lamp that hadn't been dusted in years. The house was still, but not silent, because inside his head, the music played. That same piano piece Elise used to practice, the one he had promised to attend, the one he missed, and the night after she was gone. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if the pain could be blinked away. But grief does not obey time. It loops, rewinds, stutters. Thunder rumbled beyond the window. He stood, walked slowly to the door, opened it, and for the first time in years, stepped out. The rain hit him like memory, cold and alive. He had not left the house in months, not for anything, not since the accident. But something gnawed at him, more than the past. It was Camille. He spotted her under the back awning, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. Her clothes were damp, her hair clung to her face in soaked strands. Yet, despite the cold, she smiled faintly as she watched a stray cat licking its paws beside her. "You shouldn't be out here," Remy said, his voice hoarse. Camille looked up slowly. "It's quieter," she said softly. "And the rain feels honest." He didn't reply. Instead, he walked down the porch steps, unbuttoned his coat, and wordlessly draped it over her shoulders. Her eyes widened, not from the gesture, but from the fact that he had come out for her. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the fabric close. Remy didn't respond. He stood there for a beat, then turned back toward the house, leaving the door slightly open behind him. Camille followed minutes later, shoes squishing faintly against the wooden floor. She didn't say a word, just took a blanket from the couch, curled into it, and lay silently near the fireplace. Remy sat nearby, not in front of her, not too close, but within the same room, for once. He didn't chase her out. The clock still read 12:07. Neither of them touched it. Remy broke the silence hours later. "That clock hasn't moved in 5 years." Camille didn't look at him, but her voice was gentle. "Did someone stop it on purpose?" Remy hesitated, then, "I did." She didn't push for more. Outside, the rain eased into mist. The cat curled up near the back door, as if sensing the shift. Inside, something almost imperceptible happened, a thawing of sorts, the kind only noticed when the air feels less heavy. Remy spoke again, this time softer. "You don't ask a lot of questions." "I learned not to," Camille replied. "People don't like remembering the parts of themselves they tried to bury." He turned his head slightly. "And what part of you is buried?" Camille hesitated, then looked over at him with tired eyes, the part that thought kindness was owed. He didn't know what to say to that. So he stood up, walked to the kitchen and made tea, not because she asked, not because it made sense, but because it was all he could offer. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. The light through the tall windows of the old house was softer than usual that morning, as though time itself had decided to exhale. Camille sat in the corner of the living room, her eyes fixed on the old grandfather clock standing solemnly in the middle of the hall like a sentry from another era. She stood up slowly, brushing her palms against her jeans. "If you do not want time to be stuck forever," she said, voice calm, "maybe you should let me try. Remy, who had been silently reading a yellowed manual near the fireplace, looked up, his brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The clock," Camille said, gesturing toward it. "Let me try to fix it." Remy's face darkened slightly. "That clock hasn't ticked since the day everything stopped." Camille stepped closer to it, hands behind her back. "I know, but maybe if it ticks again, something inside us will too." There was a silence between them, long, delicate. Then, without a word, Remy stood, walked over, and opened the front panel of the clock with the small brass key he always kept in his pocket. "If you break it, don't expect me to pretend it's not your fault," he said, but his voice was softer than it had ever been. Camille smiled, not with confidence, but with quiet resolve. Deal. They worked together that day. Remy pulled out old cloths, small oil cans, miniature tools and brushes that hadn't felt human fingers in years. The clock's interior was dusty and rusted, gears stuck in time, just like the house, just like its owner. Camille's hands trembled slightly at first, unused to such delicate work, but Remy guided her. His instructions were short, sometimes impatient, but they grew gentler with each passing hour. Her concentration was unwavering. Her touch became more confident. "You have good eyes," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "You see details most people overlook." Camille glanced at him, surprised by the compliment. "I used to fix broken things at the shelter. Toys, watches, radios. I figured if I couldn't fix myself, at least I could fix something." Remy was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "There was an accident, a design flaw in one of my custom pieces. It malfunctioned during a demonstration. My apprentice, he was hurt badly, burned. He never touched another watch again, and he paused, swallowing. "I never forgave myself." Camille looked at him. "What about her?" she asked gently, referring to the woman in the photo she had glimpsed earlier, framed but face down on a dusty shelf. "She left a note," Remy said. "Said she couldn't stay, that the man she loved had disappeared the day the fire happened, that he stopped hearing her music. I missed her last recital. I was too wrapped up in my guilt." Camille didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a small brass gear, polishing it with slow, careful circles. Later that evening, the silence of the house was broken by something small but monumental. Tick. The first sound was faint, hesitant. Then another, tick, tick. The pendulum began to sway. Camille stepped back, eyes wide. "It's working." Remy stood beside her, staring at the clock as if it had risen from the dead. The hands moved again, for the first time in 5 years. He looked at her. Not like before. This time it was not suspicion or disdain. It was awe, gratitude, something softer. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." And then, something neither of them expected happened. Remy laughed. A real laugh. Short, gruff, but honest. Camille laughed too, the tension finally breaking like a snapped string. She wiped a bit of grease from her cheek with her sleeve and smiled. "Looks like time isn't the only thing starting to move again." Remy didn't reply. Instead, he reached toward the clock, gently touched the swinging pendulum, and whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't talking to the clock. That night, they shared a simple dinner. Camille made soup from what was left in the pantry. Remy offered his last bottle of wine, one he had been saving for a moment he never thought would come. They ate in near silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was warm. As the clock ticked steadily behind them, its chimes soft and measured, the house felt less empty, less like a museum of regrets, and more like the beginning of something that might one day be called home. And in that stillness, something else ticked too. A broken man and a lost woman, repairing more than gears. They were starting to mend each other. The days passed in a rhythm that neither Camille nor Remy noticed at first. Mornings bled into afternoons with the soft brushing of broom bristles across old floors, and the shuffle of paper as Camille dusted and reordered the ancient books in the library. The room, once stagnant and heavy with forgotten knowledge, slowly bloomed with presence. Sunlight filtered differently through the windows now, like it, too, had been waiting for someone to open the curtains and let it in. Camille worked silently most of the time, organizing Remy's old sketchbooks, journals, and blueprints. She found pages stained with coffee, drawings of gears with handwritten notes in the margins, and a few tucked-away photos of Remy before the world had quieted him. There was one of him laughing, his head tilted back, eyes crinkled. He looked like someone else then, someone freer. She showed it to him one evening while they were sorting parts in the workshop. "You had dimples," she said, teasing softly. Remy looked at the photo, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a small grunt. "They disappeared when I stopped laughing." Camille smiled. "Well, we'll just have to find them again." The next morning, Remy surprised her by offering to go to the farmer's market together. "I haven't been in town in over 2 years," he muttered, grabbing an old linen coat. "Might as well see if they still sell decent tomatoes." Camille stared at him for a moment. "You're serious?" "As a dead battery," he replied, and to her shock, winked. He even let her trim his hair a little, just enough to stop it from falling in his eyes, and shaved for the first time since she'd arrived. When he came downstairs in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, Camille nearly dropped the teacup she was holding. "You look different," she said, trying not to gawk. Remy shrugged. "You try looking in a mirror after 5 years and not hating what you see." At the market, people glanced at him with curious eyes. Some recognized him. 1 or 2 murmured his name but didn't approach. Camille could feel the tension in his posture, but he didn't flinch. They picked out apples, bread, cheese, and a bundle of wildflowers that Remy insisted were for the kitchen window, not you. Don't get ideas. Later, they sat on the back porch, the flowers in a chipped vase between them. The breeze smelled like lavender and fresh earth. The clock in the hallway ticked softly behind the open door. It was then that Remy stood abruptly and disappeared into the house. Camille waited, unsure. A minute passed. Then 2. When he returned, he was holding something in his hand. A small velvet box, old and worn at the corners. He held it out to her. "What is it?" Camille asked, not touching it yet. "Something I made a long time ago. One of the first watches I ever finished by hand," he said. "I never sold it, never gave it away. It meant something." Camille's fingers closed around the box. Inside was a small, delicate pocket watch, silver, with a face like a full moon. The second hand ticked with gentle resolve. On the back was an engraving. She traced it with her thumb. "You restarted the time in me." Her breath caught. "I don't know what this is between us," Remy said, his voice rough, quiet. "And maybe I don't need to define it. But I do know that before you walked through that door, I was just existing. And now—" Camille blinked fast, the tears rising before she could stop them. "You're living," he nodded. She looked down at the watch again. "It's beautiful. It's yours. But no buts." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred, like time itself had bowed its head, listening. Camille held the watch to her chest. "I don't know what I've done to deserve this." "You stayed," Remy whispered. "That's more than anyone else did." She smiled through her tears, a smile not of joy, but of knowing, of 2 souls recognizing each other in the quietest ways. That night, as they sat together beneath the ticking of a newly mended world, neither said the word love, but it was there, in the clock that ticked, in the watch that breathed, and in the space between their hands, slowly closing. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the kitchen table. Camille stirred her tea slowly, her eyes drifting toward the letter she had just opened. A small, shaking smile crept across her face. "They accepted me," she said softly, almost to herself. Remy, tightening the spring on a pocket watch at the counter, looked up. "Accepted you where?" "The community library. she said, holding out the letter. Part-time assistant? Children's programs, literacy help, organizing donations? It's small, but it's something. Remy didn't say anything for a moment. Then he simply nodded, eyes lingering on her longer than necessary. Good, she smiled again. They said they were really impressed with my determination, resourcefulness, and humility. Her voice dropped slightly, teasing. Wonder who could have written such a glowing recommendation. Remy focused hard on the pocket watch. Sounds like someone with good taste in lost causes. Remy, I might have mentioned your name. Once. Maybe. She walked over, leaned against the table, and looked at him. Thank you. He didn't look up. Don't thank me. Just don't forget who you are, that's all. At the library, Camille found more than just shelves and silence. She found purpose. Every day she worked alongside volunteers, guided curious hands to books they'd never dared open before, listened to the quiet voices of teens who wandered in with nowhere else to go. She knew that look, the hesitant glance around the room, the way they avoided eye contact, the way they flinched at kindness like it was a trap. She saw herself in them. One afternoon, a boy no older than 16 shuffled through the glass doors, dripping from the rain, hoodie clinging to his thin frame. He didn't speak, just hovered near the computer stations. Camille walked over, gently placed a towel on the desk beside him. You can dry off here, she said. No one's going to ask questions. He blinked, surprised, but he took the towel. That was how it always started, small gestures, open doors, the same way someone had once, grudgingly, opened a door for her. Back at the house, Remy found himself restless. The space felt different without Camille constantly moving, cleaning, humming old tunes under her breath. Her absence left a silence that wasn't quite the same as the one before. He stepped into the old workshop, the one he hadn't touched in nearly 6 years. Dust lay thick across every surface, but the bones of the place were still strong. He ran his fingers over the tool bench, over the drawers that held screws and gears and dreams he had long ago buried. Maybe it was time. It took days to clean, repair, restore, but Remy moved with a steady rhythm, like his hands remembered more than his heart did. When he was done, the workshop breathed again, slow, warm, alive. Then he did something he never imagined. He pinned a small note to the front door of the house. Bellamy Workshop. Open basic watchmaking, life skills, second chances welcome. The first knock came a week later. A young man, tattoos trailing down his arms, holding a broken wristwatch like it was made of glass. Someone said, "You help people fix things?" he asked. Remy looked at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." Camille returned one evening to find 3 teenagers seated around Remy's workbench, each hunched over old watches, learning to reassemble time. She watched from the doorway, her eyes misting as she listened to Remy's voice, firm but patient, gentle in a way she had never heard before. Later, when they were alone, she asked him, "What made you open the workshop again?" He shrugged, cleaning his glasses. "The world's already full of broken things. Maybe it needs more people willing to fix them." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And you? Are you fixed now?" "No," he said quietly, "but I'm working on it. With you." They stood there in the soft ticking of clocks and laughter drifting in from the hallway, no longer 2 broken people hiding from the world, but 2 souls brave enough to build something new. Not perfect, but real. And that was enough. The house was no longer quiet. Where once silence pressed against the walls like a second skin, now it echoed with soft music, laughter, and the gentle tick of clocks that all told the right time. It had been 1 year since Camille had walked through the door by mistake, rain-soaked, exhausted, and nameless, and everything had changed. Remy moved through the halls differently now. He no longer shuffled like a man carrying a ghost on his shoulders. He walked with purpose, sleeves rolled up, hands often smudged with oil or dust. His workshop buzzed with life. Young people came and went, some staying for an hour, some for a season, all of them leaving a mark. He was no longer just a reclusive watchmaker haunted by time. He had become something else entirely. A mentor. A guide. A man who could still feel broken sometimes, but now chose to build. Camille, meanwhile, had become the rhythm of the house. She wasn't simply surviving anymore, she was thriving. Mornings began with the aroma of coffee and jazz spinning from a worn record player. Afternoons were for work at the library, where she was now full-time, running a program for displaced youth and women recovering from trauma. Evenings were for reading in the armchair by the fire, or tinkering with gears and springs beside Remy, the two of them side by side in quiet synchronicity. She no longer felt invisible. She felt home. One late autumn night, the air crisp with the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the house was filled with people. Former students from the workshop gathered to celebrate the anniversary of its reopening. The parlor was alight with conversation and clinking teacups. Someone played the piano gently in the corner. Camille watched from the staircase, smiling. Remy stood beside her, holding 2 mugs. He handed her one. "Still think I should have stayed the hermit?" he asked, teasing. Camille sipped her drink and grinned. "Only on the days you burn the soup." They shared a look, one full of history, of battles fought and lost, and won again. At midnight, as the last of the guests began to leave, Remy turned to Camille and asked, "Will you come with me?" She followed him into the old study. The grandfather clock stood there, tall, dark, and proud, no longer frozen at 12:07. Now it ticked with confidence, its pendulum swaying like a heart that had remembered how to beat. Remy reached for the small brass key and opened the glass panel. He adjusted a gear delicately, and with a soft chime, the clock began its 12-note melody. Midnight. Camille looked up at the moving hands. She reached out and placed her fingers gently on the wood. "So many years," she whispered. "So many days I thought had ended before they even began." Remy turned to her, his voice low. "Do you remember what you told me the day you fixed it?" She nodded. "If you do not want time to stop forever, let me try." And you did. Her hand slid into his. "We didn't fix time, Remy. We just learned how to love it again." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he felt the ache of every second he had once wasted, but it no longer hurt, because now every tick was shared. Every chime belonged to both of them. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the old oak tree. Inside, 2 souls stood before a clock that had once held the weight of grief and now held the rhythm of hope. Time moved forward, and they, at last, moved with it. Sometimes the door we walk through by accident leads us exactly where we were meant to be. Camille thought she had nothing left, no name, no future, no place in this world. Remy thought time had ended the day he lost everything, but in the quiet corners of an old house, in the ticking of forgotten clocks, 2 broken souls found healing not through miracles, but through small acts of kindness, shared silence, and the courage to begin again. Because time does not always heal, but love can teach us how to move forward, 1 second at a time. If this story touched your heart, reminded you that hope can grow in the unlikeliest places, and that sometimes the loneliest heart simply needs someone to knock on the wrong door, then do not keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales that warm the soul, stir emotions, and remind us what it means to be human. Click the bell icon so you never miss a story, and remember, your next chapter might be just one small choice away. We'll see you in the next story.